Hello, my friends. It's Dr. Alyssa Olenick recapping my year of training for my first 100-mile ultra marathon. Let's dive in. If you're listening to the podcast, welcome back. I know it has been a while since I have uploaded a podcast episode, guys, but I promise more should hopefully be coming soon. And if you're tuning in on YouTube, you've hopefully been here for the entire 100-mile ultra marathon training series. And if not, if you haven't, make sure to go back and watch those videos because I think it'll be really informative on everything I'm about to talk about here today. So first things first, I am going to kind of recap a little bit of how this year of training went for me, and then I'm going to dive into your guys' questions from YouTube, Instagram, and or my community here with this. So if you guys are new here, I am training for the No Business 100-mile ultra marathon. I don't know if this will come out before or after I will have attempted or hopefully finished that race, but I wanted to make sure I take the time to break down my training and answer your guys' questions because I do get a lot of those, and or people will be very curious, especially if I do finish this thing, on how the heck I managed to do it. So I started training officially January 1st of this year. So the race was, you could sign up for the race. It launched on New Year's Eve at midnight. So I literally got up at midnight and signed up for this race, and I did it. And I signed up with my buddy Jason, who I ran my 100K with a few years ago, and he's going to be doing the race here with me. So this was like, hey, we are doing this. This is the year. We're going for it. Jason is finishing up his residency. I am remotely finishing up my postdoc, and we just decided like this is the year. It's been a while. I know a lot of people wanted to know like, how did you decide that this is the year? And I think for me, it was just, this is a year that I have no in-person job. I'm fully remote. I don't know what I'm doing next in my next year or my next chapter of my life. And so I just knew that this was the year to do it, which is silly and seems crazy. If you followed me along on Instagram and you've seen how much I've traveled this year, you might think, Alyssa, how the heck did you decide that this is the year? But realistically, it was now or never. Life is always going to be crazy. It's always going to be busy. And of course, I make it crazier and busier by doing these things. But I knew I had enough space to make space for this type of training this year that I didn't have to worry about it, conflicting with my dissertation or all these other things. I did train for that return to 50 miler last year, partially while in my postdoc and traveling and moving and getting married. I trained for my first 100K during 2020 and a bunch of my first ultras during my PhD. So training for ultras, while your life's a little bit hectic, is not foreign to me, but I did take a hiatus from it when I was wrapping up my PhD, because I just had so much work. My stress was too high. I was just not in a great place. And so I did take a hiatus from that. I recognized during those years that would have just taken too much from me. So this was a year that I recognized, okay, it is a little bit of a crazy year. I'm going to start early and I'm going to plan around these things, and I'm going to really dedicate so much of my training and time this year to this endeavor, especially with having, honestly, the thing that's, I love you guys here, don't mind doing this, but the thing that takes up the most time with all this is not just the training, but also like I've documented this along the way as I go. So let's do a quick recap on how this year went, my training, the timeline of everything, and then I will dive into your guys' questions here. So first of all, if you are new here or you haven't tuned in or followed along, I really encourage you to go back and start with my Return to Ultra series over on YouTube of me coming back to ultra running and training, prepping, and preparing for my 50-mile race last year. So this build up to this 100-miler did not just start this year. This 100% started a little over 2 years ago when I was coming out of my PhD, coming back from my Achilles injury, coming back from massive phases of burnout, I was just not in a good place. And so I knew that I wanted to get back to ultras. I had originally planned to run a 50-miler that year. After I finished my PhD, I had, finally gotten to a point where I started running again. I started adding in a bunch of speed workouts. I started trying to get fitter and add that back in after all the fitness I had lost finishing my PhD, which I think many of you can relate to. And then, of course, we know the whole story. I got injured. I finished my dissertation in a boot. It was a whole thing. And so I knew that I wanted to run a 50-miler that year going out of my PhD, but it wasn't going to happen. I essentially ended up doing a run, walk, rehab, recovery that summer and building up to some shorter distance trail races that fall of 22. But I knew that in 2023, my goal was to get back to the ultramarathon distance. And I really wanted to run a 50-miler. I don't know why I really love the 50-mile distance after, I've done a bunch of these ultras, and I do really like that 50-mile distance. It's a little bit longer, obviously, than a 50K. It feels a little bit more like a true ultra, but you can kind of finish it in a day and you can kind of actually run it a little bit. So I've really learned to love that distance, and so that felt special for me to get back to for that year. So hang on, sit. Kona wants to come into the podcast. What are you doing, girlfriend? What are you doing? They can't even see you. They love you. So if you haven't, go back and watch that because you will see how I kind of built back to that. But I knew going into that 50 miler that I was doing it with the intention of potentially doing a 100 miler this year. But I wanted to see how that went, how my body responded, how I felt, and how this year seemed. And I knew me and my buddy Jason had talked about it a lot. And I was like, yes, but I'm not fully committing into it until I at least get this goal. Like I really like to celebrate and work towards and focus on one goal before, overly focusing on the next one and celebrating what you're doing and focusing on the work at hand. And so I kind of took my deload off season, backed off a little bit over the holidays last year, maybe a little bit more than I should have, but I was busy. Things were crazy as they always are for me. But on January 1st this year, I essentially woke up, signed up for that race, and I was like, I'm all in, I'm fully committed. And, there's never going to be a right time. There's never going to be a right time to sign up for races or do things. Life's always going to be crazy and busy, as I said. But I knew that if I came into this year and I really built my year around it, I could make it happen and I could do it and I could have a lot of fun doing it as well. And I also knew that I wanted the fitness to say yes to so many things. And so many of the trips and adventures and opportunities I had this year involved me using fitness or celebrating that fitness or taking trips to use that fitness. And so that was really exciting for me as well to regain that back. And so I started training in January. And so January to February is kind of an ease back in, slowly ramp back up my running mileage. My hypermobility, my body freaked out. So we just kind of eased back in, went on and off with that. And I did bring back in a little bit of speed workouts during that phase of the first 3 months of the year. I was doing some speed workouts. You can see that in my full week of training videos earlier on. We're just kind of building a lower base of like that 20 to 30 miles per week, kind of in those first 8 weeks of the year. And then moving into March through May, I kind of worked into that 30 to 40 mile a week range for most of that, building up into that mid to upper 40s towards kind of the end of May into June, and I had a few weeks in the end of May, beginning of June that were about 46 mile per weeks. And then I got the flu in June, which kind of threw that off. And then throughout all of that here, if you've been following me along on Instagram, you know that, during that first phase of the year, I traveled. I went to the Grand Canyon in Vegas in March. I ran a race in April. I reeled a dog in April. I went to Long Island in April. In May, I was in PA, Boston, PA, Shenandoah, Virginia, back home. Then late June, I got sick. Then I went to Banff, and then I was in Seattle, and then I was back in the mountains in Shenandoah. So I've been all over this year. And so I really had to weave these weeks of training in however I could, whenever I could, in whatever way that I could. But when I came back from that trip in Banff, that first week of July, I knew, okay, I'm coming back from this trip. Like there's no more base building or slowly easing in. I wanted to have my mileage kind of in the 50 miles per week already at that point in time. But between getting sick and travel, it just didn't happen. But I knew I was in an okay place about that 16-week out build up to the race, maybe a little bit less there, that I was like, okay, I'm coming back from this trip and it's go time. Like it is absolutely go time. There's no more messing around. Like this is what needs to happen. And so if you've ever trained for an ultra or a marathon or a big race, you know that like 8, 12, 16 week build up into that is where most of the work is being done. The base build phase is really sustainable. I mean, balancing that with lifting, with running and doing all that, especially when it's not your first rodeo, is kind of enjoyable. It feels like a really good balance of things. You're not tipping over what feels like your capacity of what you can handle in a week with everything else you're doing, or it doesn't feel like a full-time job to start training. And at this point in time, July on really became that. And so I came back from that trip. I was in Shenandoah with my husband and my mother-in-law that week, and I think I did a 52, 53 mile week that week that I was there, and that was my first week back into running and training. And so I was like, okay, that felt good, that felt fine. Reintroduced back lifting after 3 weeks off that second week of July. Added, back in running as well, eased back in. And then I had one more week of training, and then I did that 50K race and then took a down week there in July. But then after that race, that recovery there, then I continued to build up that running, keep building my week's miles of training. And then I went into that Shenandoah weekend with Alex, my friend, where we did 30 and 20 miles back to back during the weekend there of training. And then I recovered from that. And then I kept building my mileage into a kind of wonky week. It was a 7-day period, but it wasn't a full Strava week, so it doesn't count, where I did do a 64 and like a half mile week before I went to California for 2 weeks beginning in September. I pulled back during that one. I trained, I think I did a 57 mile week the first week going into California at home, mixed into my weekend there in California. Kind of took a back off week during a trip that I hosted out in Yosemite. And then I came back, did my 70 mile week, the week that I did that 12-hour race and ran 53 miles as part of that. Recovered off that week, did another 65 mile week, a 55 mile week because I was in was in Colorado for the last weekend of training, and I knew altitude and the stress of that was a little bit harder on me. So I definitely took things a little bit easier and just missed some miles from having to travel for work. But I was still okay with that because of the buildup that I had. And I think in a 12-week period leading up to that peak of that race right before my taper, I did 9 weeks of 55 to 75 mile per week during that. And I felt really good about that. So my goal this year, and a lot of questions I get in this, is like, how do you decide your peak mileage? And so for me, when you're thinking about 100 miles and bigger, longer races for ultra marathons, you're thinking about probably between 50 to 70 miles per week, unless, you're these elite people or you can handle a lot of miles or you're super fit. But usually that's where people are probably landing most of the time for these types of races. And so what you're thinking about with ultras too is just time on feet, spending a lot of time each week on your feet and training and doing those things. And I know that I am not a super fast runner. My zone 2 isn't super fast in the heat and humidity this summer, which absolutely wrecked me more than ever. I don't know why it was so hard on me this summer. I really ran so many of my easy runs or my runs when I was building up my volume where there's already fatigue, not only from building the volume, but also heat and humidity and just the accumulation of training. I just ran a lot of my easy runs this year from like 10:30 to 11:30 minutes per mile. Some of those really hot, humid days, I was just like, I put up the white flag because it would just wreck me the rest of the day. And that wasn't worth it to me. I didn't need that. I just needed the accumulative aerobic adaptations from that. And I'm probably not running my 100 miler faster than an 11 minute per mile pace when I'm actually running during that race. So I didn't make any drama about that. I know people make a lot of drama about slowing down the heat and humidity or your zone 2 slowing down even more when your fatigue starts to build from your volume building, but I just didn't. I just said, whatever, I don't care. And so I don't want to say to a point that like you can't run your easy runs too slow. Obviously, if your efficiency and your form breaks down or you start to get to the point around 13 and a half minutes per mile where you start to kind of go into this hard shuffle, inefficient walk thing, yes, that's not ideal. But I can still run at a runnable effort at 11 minute per mile pace, even if, I could have pushed to 10, 9:30, 9s. I just didn't find it necessary. So I was accumulating a lot of time on feet through that because my runs were just taking longer and or sacrificing, I guess, more mileage to kind of accumulate that time under a lower fatigue, which I think was really helpful for me, especially in the heat and the humidity this summer. Again, I felt extra wrecked by it this year, so I just made that call for myself, and I don't regret it. I think that was a smart choice. I don't feel like I lacked anything from my training from that. And when I ran hard more intentionally and strategically within that, rather than pushing it all the time. And so through that phase, I had that 55 to 70 mile per weeks. And so I was probably getting in 10 to 15 hours per week of running and or trail running or hiking, just depending on how much time I was spending road running versus trail running. So my biggest training weeks were I had the Smokies weekend in May, the full week that I was in the Shenandoah, Central Virginia mountains visiting Bethany in June, and then that first week of July where I was also in the mountains for that week there, where I was getting a lot of time on feet because those weeks were really heavily trail dominated. I was getting a ton of trail time on feet those weeks, so my time on feet went up within those weeks, which was really helpful early on. And then even throughout the building up of my phases, I was probably averaging about 10 to 15 hours a week of time on feet. Again, just depending on how I was splitting it, if I was racing, if that like long weekend effort that I did with Alex, those types of different things just dictated that. But that's kind of what I wanted and I was aiming for there, with most of my like traditional running weeks being about 11 to 13 hours of time on feet or running each week in that buildup. And so when it comes to, again, 100 milers, you're usually seeing people between 50 and 70 miles per week. I do have a whole video talking about minimums and training for your first 50K, your first ultra marathon. Roughly about 6 to 8 hours per week is usually what I recommend for people with those goals. And then 50 miles, liking that 8 to 10-ish. Again, you can always do more in these situations if you have bigger goals or you are a more fit individual, or you're trying to PR, or you're training for these type of races or whatever it is. But those are kind of the minimums I like to aim for. But I knew this year for the 100 miler, like a ton of time on feet is really what I was aiming for. And I wasn't so worried about splitting the difference between miles. Some week my mileage was higher because I was running more on road or flat trail. Some weeks it was lower because of that. And so I did self-coach myself through all of this because my travel was crazy and everything was all over the place. And so I really try to stay consistent as much as I could, but I was okay with being flexible and adaptable in response to those shifts in my training, especially once I got to the minimum mileage that I was kind of really aiming for maintaining. So my goal was to maintain at least 55 miles a week for most of that buildup and really accumulate that area under the curve as much as I could and really make gains that fitness. So many people over rely on that single peak week or the one big run or the one big week of training. And I really, really like to encourage people and clients all the time to shift that focus to accumulating fitness over time. It's not just one race prep, it's multiple race preps or multiple seasons or multiple years of building fitness strung together. So this year's fitness was building off of last year's fitness, and my base build from, my build back from January to February built the base that then I built that, the base building phase of March, April, May on before, I then ramped up my training into the summer leading into the race. So it really wasn't just only those few weeks of training that did the magic. It was all of those in the accumulative time under the curve. I also knew I was traveling a lot. So I did have a lot of down weeks built in there for recovery, and some of my down weeks were a lot lower than maybe I had anticipated or planned them to be for my deloads or my back offs. But I really let my body lead that. Either if I was super fatigued, super tired, I didn't overdo it. If I needed that extra recovery after a race effort, since I didn't really taper or fully recover through these things, I let myself have it. Or if I was traveling, I made do with what I could. I hiked if I could, or I counted those miles if I was hiking for those trips, and or ran where I could when I was traveling, but I just didn't make drama about it. I built in so much time into my training that I knew that I could afford those kind of wonky oscillations that you'll see in my Strava data here, because I was still getting a lot of those big weeks that I needed within that and or recovering between those. So again, I got about 9 weeks of 55 to 70 mile per weeks in my big build up leading up to this, and I feel really good about that, with about probably 11 to 13 up to 15 hours per week of time on feet for some of my bigger weeks this past year. And that's before lifting. So I did lift 3 days per week all year up until about, I want to say 2 weeks ago. I removed the third day of lifting. I backed off to just 2 days of lifting for my final 2 peak weeks of this, and then my taper, and then I'm kind of pulling that back now. I mostly pulled it back at that point in time because traveling and just work was too much. I really hung on to that 3 days per week for as long as I could, but there was weeks when I was traveling this year or prepping for those races where I did pull back to 2 days per week because it was just too much with everything else I had going on. So I oscillated between those this year, which is perfectly fine. In our list method programs, Perform is 3 days per week, but if you're in race, which is going to lead you up into the 12 to 16 weeks leading into your race, you have that optional third day. If you want to train with us, you can kind of follow that same system that I used and did this year with training. And so I had that come in or I had it come back out, but it was always kind of an option, but I always still had my bread and butter key lifts or what I was doing. And so you can go back and watch pretty much all of those full weeks of training videos. I have one for most months or major blocks of training, so you can kind of see how that changed and shifted across the year. And I just uploaded one as well, what I was doing during my peak week of training, so you can kind of see what that looked like. So that was kind of the way I approached this year of training and how things looked for me. I focused so much on consistency, showing up, area under the curve, not getting injured, not overly fatiguing myself, and giving myself a really long, slow, consistent build up. And I really just wanted to gain fitness. And I think you guys can see that with each race video that I posted this year. I feel like I was fitter, I recovered better, I was fresher. It was just really exciting to see that all fold out. And I am honestly right now very excited going into next week. I'm hoping that my normal antsy pants nerves does not come for me, but I'm actually really, really excited. I feel really good about this year of training, and I think that's the best thing that I could have done for myself. Was I wanted to train like hell. I wanted to train hard. I wanted to show up. I think this entire year, I only missed one scheduled lift. That doesn't mean like the weeks I pulled back from 3 to 2 or was traveling, those were intentionally like, hey, I'm making this concession. But like I only skipped one upper body lift this entire year. And then I think I honestly did every single run or hit every single mileage goal for the week for almost every single week, other than recovery or deload weeks or post-race weeks where I just kind of, if I was feeling super fried, I didn't do it. I think there was one day that I went out for a run and I went like 2 miles and I was like, you know what, this is just not a net positive. And so I just cut it and went back home. And so I made little concessions like that. You'll see in my peak week of training video, I wanted more miles on Sunday and I was on a Stairmaster just shoving food in my face and I just couldn't keep up with how hungry I was or my blood sugar or any of that. And I was like, this is not a net positive. So I made small, smart concessions or adjustments like that, but I really didn't deliberately miss or skip training unless I was sick or traveling or, just needed that extra recovery at any point in time. I was so committed to this goal. And I think now that it affords me to have this confidence that I feel really good about the training that I did this year leading into this race. And so I really hope that shows up, and I can see that, because I think for me, the biggest thing when it came to committing to a 100-miler goal is, I had this conversation with Regis, my husband, years ago. And he was like, I don't think that you have it in you to train for 100-miler. And he didn't mean that or say that in a negative way. He just saw me train for my first few 50Ks or 50-milers. And I didn't like the high mileage running. It exhausted me. I dreaded training. I just wanted to race. I'd get really mentally fatigued. So I do think I've built a lot of like cliche, quote unquote, like mental resilience when it comes to running, or just it becomes easier because I've been doing it so much more over these years. I also think that that shift of focusing on the progress and the process, not just the race and the goal itself, and not putting the pressure all just on the single day, but really learning to love the process of getting better and the magic of that coming out of my injury last year. I talked about that a lot more in those podcasts leading into my 50-miler, really shifted the way that I view training and racing. And honestly, this year I enjoyed training for the most part. There was the few final weeks coming off of that 12-hour race until my taper where I was just utterly, sheerly, totally exhausted. I was just absolutely effed. Like, I was just so tired, so fatigued, mentally, physically. I was eating food, I was sleeping, I was doing everything right. It was just that big build and peak of all that training volume, which is really noticeable. I can feel such a stark difference now in my taper on how much better I feel. Honestly, it's incredible. But all that to say, I enjoyed showing up for this year. I was motivated. I was excited about it. I didn't really even do it out of fear, which was really exciting for me. And so I just was really committed to showing up and seeing that. And no matter what happens next Friday, I am so proud of the work that I put in and the mental shifts and physical shifts it's taken to get here. And so if you've learned anything from this journey this year, from following me or the advice I give, train early, train often, be consistent, take the time to invest in building your base or your weaknesses. Don't rush it to your races or give them the respect and time and training they need. And if you don't have it in you this training cycle, it's okay to build to a smaller goal and build to that with time, or take, longer to get here. I have friends and peers and people who, they run the 100-miler after like a year or two of training, and that's okay. It took me a long time to get here, and I'm still really proud of my journey, and that's okay if that similar truth holds true for you. So that's kind of my recap on my training leading up to this year. And then I want to just dive in now to your guys' questions related to this, either from following along on my YouTube or following along on Instagram this year. And I've kind of put them into buckets on recovery, training, taper, and or nutrition within this here. So I'm going to try to go through as many of these as I can. They seem pretty big, but they're printed out really large from me taking screenshots, and kind of make sure I'm actually helping you guys with the questions that you have for me here today. So a bunch of people wanted to know what I am looking forward to most post-race. And while I don't mind this question, I haven't really thought too much about that, because it will so much depend on, one, how the race goes, the kind of recovery I need, if something happens out there that's, worse or better, whatever it is. But I have been so dead set focused on the taper that I have just been looking forward to training less. I know people hate the freaking taper. Oh, I get the taper tantrums. Oh, I want to move, I want to exercise. No. I have been looking forward for weeks to just training a normal amount, just training like a realistic and normal amount on top of like the work that I do, and actually having time and space in my days to get my work done and not feeling like I wake up, my feet touch the ground. I am doing something from the time I wake up to the time I go to bed, between training, eating, cooking, recovering, laundry, tidying up my house, taking care of my dog, plus training within that. I mean, some of these days, I was training like 90 to 120 minutes, like multiple days per week, plus my long runs. It was just a lot. So I'm just looking forward to exercising like a normal amount, is what I would say my answer to that is, mixed with eating a higher-ish fat diet, not eating as many carbs. I get kind of sick of just like the ultra processed carbs after a while. So I do like really start to crave like vegetables and fats after races, or in general at this point in training. I'm just like, I don't even want to think about it. I want to eat like salmon and pecans. So those are the things that I usually look forward to with training, and just like the low pressure few weeks of recovering, exercising kind of how you want to, easing back into things, just kind of taking a breather, being a human for a second. I think that season is needed. And I think a lot of people will rush that recovery process because they feel like they need to just jump back into training. And I really do just like to enjoy sometimes like going for more walks or, taking my time to get back into training and not feeling like I need to hyper swing right back into 15 hours a week of exercise. A lot of people are asking me about recovery in these questions. So a lot of people struggle with recovery. This person specifically said, what's your recovery process? I struggle training for distance running while also training my legs with weights. I feel like it gives me no time for my legs to recover and my knees and my muscles are struggling. This person specifically is doing 4 runs per week of a combination of things and 2 leg days. So my shameless plug here is stop what you're doing and join us in the LIST method, because we specifically have programmed and curated everything for you within the app to balance this, so to speak, for you in a way that is recoverable. Because when it comes to this, it's hard to say, are your leg days or your lifting days conducive to the running volume that you're doing? Are you doing a program that is specifically designed to consider, that you are doing running on top of lifting, or is it just giving you a standardized lifting program that you're slapping running on top of? Are you doing too many hard sessions? Are you doing multiple hard interval sessions per week with your runs? Are you balancing out the easy days with the hard days and or balancing that out with your list per week? And so for me, the biggest things when it comes to recovery is, 1, am I doing an appropriate amount of volume that I'm adapted to, or is enough that is, kind of forcing me to adapt, nudging me, giving me that, pushing my fitness forward, but not so much that my body can't handle recovering it. That's not just lifting or running. It is a combination of both. You have to think when you're hybrid training or doing lifting with running, your overall volume capacity includes lifting and running, and how much you can handle both at any given point in time depends on your individual fitness with each. So a less fit person can handle less of each, where a more fit person can handle more of each. And you can kind of see that across this year with me. If I jumped into the training that I did in September, in January, I would have absolutely blown up. So it really depends on like what you can handle in that moment, mixed with your lifting program, and if the volume is appropriate or stimulus is appropriate to allow you to actually recover within that. And then the kind of the layout that you're taking across the week. Are you giving yourself at least 1 or 2 rest days? Are you spacing out some of your higher, harder intensity stuff on separate days, or kind of using the heavy lifting leg days and your speed workout days being on the same days? There's 2 different approaches that you can do with that. So I would say those are the big things, is thinking about volume, laying out your week, all the stuff. But the other things that people so often neglect, that you see me harp about all the time, is eating. You need to be eating enough protein and enough carbs to recover for these things. And I think a lot of people are under eating their carbs. My fast and fed guide will be really helpful for you for navigating this nutritional side of things as well. Or if you want help with balancing your weeks of training and the nutrition, just get hybrid, because it has that information in there, both of those pieces in the same one single ebook. But people really need to overemphasize the carb intake, I think, than what they typically tend to do. And then sleeping. Those are really the big things. I don't do anything fancy. I know someone else asked in here if you do any stretching or mobility or any of these things, and I don't. I'm hypermobile. So much of that type of training for me is really injury, prehab, rehab type stuff, trying to strengthen my in ranges, but I don't do any foam rolly, Theragunning. We have a Theragun, a foam roll to warm up sometimes, but most of my recovery process is just eating extra on the days that I feel wrecked and or sleeping a little bit more, or those, I really hate to say it, but I just ate a lot of food this year and really try to keep my sleep. And then the weeks that I did have down weeks after races or big efforts, I really did pull back and let myself fully recover within that. But also to some degree, obviously if you're having pain or you're having muscle soreness or fatigue and DOMS all the time, something is off. You shouldn't have it all of the time. But a part of hybrid or concurrent training is you're probably going to run on tired legs a lot, or they're going to impact each other a little bit if you're training hard at any given point in time. But it shouldn't be totally derailing your training all the time. And if it is, then you probably just need a better, smarter program to eat more, sleep more, or just manage that volume across the board. So the next one is attempted my first ultra on the 18th, tips for taper, mindset, post-race recovery, feeling underprepared, etc. So a lot of people want to know about the recovery. It kind of touched on that there. I'll try to potentially document more of that after the race here. Tips for the taper. Enjoy doing less. That is my tip for the taper. Don't remove intensity entirely. You're going to pull back your volume either over 3 weeks, 2 weeks, or 1 week, depending on how long of a race you're doing. I'm doing about a 2.5-ish week taper, more or less, for my race. Since it starts on a Friday, it kind of got mixed in with the weeks, pulled back by about 30% the first week, pulling back now this week about 50%. And then I'll do a few runs leading into next week's race just to kind of keep my legs going, keeping some intensity in there. You don't need to remove all of the intensity. You want to keep that speed and turnover and, on your feet, whether that's strides or intervals or whatever that is. In the List Method programs, we do it for you. But sleep, eat. Don't freak out thinking that you're losing all of your fitness. Sometimes the taper, because you're recovering during it, it makes you feel like you're slower, you're less fit, you're a blob. Like, you just need to trust the taper because your body's absorbing all that fitness, it's recovering, and it's getting ready to prime you for that day. Do not screw up your taper by going out and doing too much because you're unwilling to do less and let your body recover. But also don't make the mistake of doing too little. You do want to still pull back and maintain intelligently that volume of what you're doing, but you're trying to recover it strategically so you can absorb and perform on that day. So I think so many people, their biggest mistake is that they just can't learn to lean into that rest and recovery. That is a mindset thing I think so many people could probably address. Or don't think, oh my God, I just finally got to the taper, and let everything fall apart. I've had that happen to me in the past, and it's been okay. Usually life got in the way, but I do feel like my races where I do just stick to the taper as much as I did the training, it does go better. So pulling that back gradually, keeping in that little bit of intensity, and or kind of tapering out that volume as I go into the race, eating, continuing to sleep, and or just enjoying doing less and not overly stressing myself out, I think are the keys to a successful taper. What has the last 10 months taught you? And I feel like I should have these great philosophical answers to this. I have some really great ones of these that have asked me these things. And so I think this last 10 and a half months has truly taught me that I'm capable of even more than I thought I was. And I'm able to train for a high distance, high volume race and enjoy it, have a good time, not make it feel dreadful, but also I can do it and make it feel easy to me relatively. It was hard, but it didn't have to be, I didn't need to make it harder than it was. And I think in the past I made training harder than it needed to be. And so much of this also this year has truly taught me is that I can just show up and do it even when I don't want to. It's such a valuable skill. I mean, you see it all the time peak up when you're training for things. I mean, I can't tell you guys how many of these runs or these lifts that I was fighting tooth or nail to get myself in the gym or out the door. I would procrastinate it all day, or I did not want to do it, or it was just automation. Just how much of that can become automated and you just kind of stop dealing with your own crap and you just do it. I think that was probably the biggest thing for me that stuck out this year, is just that lack of needing, I don't want to say motivation or relying on discipline, because that's a lot more nuanced, and my psychology trained friends can unpack that a little more delicately than me. But just that I am showing up for myself because I made that promise to myself was really reinforced throughout this year. And I was just like, shit, this is the type of person I am. I just have to do it. And I just did it. So that's probably the biggest thing I think this year and a little bit of last year has really taught me a lot, mixed with you can enjoy the process and have fun while training for big things and live your life while doing it too. I think that was huge this year as well. Carb loading question. Carb loading, how many days, what you ate, etc., how to avoid feeling like a total muffin at the start with 2 to 3 days being stuffed with carbs and sodium. And so I will start carb loading next week. I am more worried about my GI and my stomach and my gut and how that's going to perform on race day than having the perfect carb load execution. I just know that. I will probably not eat a ton the day before the race simply because I will be nervous, and I know that about myself. So I try to eat more the week of leading into it, just to kind of start ramping that up leading into it. There is perfect ways to execute carb loading. My ebook Endure or my Fast and Fed mini guide will break those down for you. But I really do try to ramp it up, the 3 days. So my race is Friday. So probably Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'll try to ramp up to 500 plus grams of carbs per day, doing a ton of cereal. I think honestly, the trick to doing it without feeling like a total muffin, quote unquote here, is doing really easy, simple digesting carbs and or things that I feel digest through your body really quickly, and mixing that in with a ton of liquid calories, like drinking Gatorades, drinking juice, things that aren't super fibrous, you don't need to be eating a ton of fruit and or starchy carbs, really simplifying it so it's easier for your body to break down and digest. You are going to feel more full because you are bringing in water with those carbs into your muscles. That's what you want. And you are using sodium and hydrating. If you're feeling like this, potentially there might be something off with your carb loading approach. If you're feeling super, super gross from this, I feel like, yes, to some degree, you are constantly stuffing yourself, but you shouldn't feel super terrible going into it. Like, you should feel like you just have, your body's going to feel like it is filled with carbs and you're eating a lot and you're going to feel very full with that. But I would maybe simplify what you're eating or shift more of that over to liquid calories. So that way you aren't just only eating a ton of food. I think that's more where that heaviness comes from. And, or if you feel like you're overly sodium, like you don't have to pull that back a little bit potentially. Maybe you just need some more regular water. I mean, sodium's great to some degree with training, but also we don't want to overdo it. It just might not be necessary for what you're doing, especially if you are, eating a lot of foods during that time. You might be getting some sodium and additionally with that. So you can always work with a sports nutrition RD if that's something that you're really struggling with. Or maybe you just weren't stuffing yourself with carbs all year like me, and I'm just so used to it at this point in time. So I don't know. That could be potentially it as well. Recovery. How do you reintroduce running post-race? Like, what should it consist of? So this person actually said they're about to join the LIST method. Hello, we can't wait to have you after this race for themselves. But I will say I like to take the reverse taper approach. One, you can take off as much time as you need from running after the race. I have no formal plans of adding back in running to any degree after my race. It will be very intuitive. I do like taking like a full week off after an ultra. I mean, with this 100-miler, I might take up to 10 days, 2 weeks off on just seeing how my body feels of really formal training. Last year for my 50, I took about a week-ish off. I think I did my first workout that following Friday, and I did like a really low effort kind of rowing type workout. But I like to reverse taper my lifting and reverse taper my running back up. We have that built into our LIST method program race and some of our base build programs. So you can kind of ease back into that after a race. So if you are finishing a race and you want to train with us, we can ease that back in for you. But I like slowly building that up over like 3 to 4 weeks following your race is recovery, actually taking time off, actually recovering, and then gradually easing and then kind of reverse tapering it back, building yourself back up to that volume. And then once you get to that base of kind of your normal training, then building off for your strength season or building off into your next training cycle from there. Question: how do you even get started with a race of this distance? I'm freakishly intrigued, but I haven't even run my first half yet. So first of all, run your first half. Get used to running and training. If you guys are interested in running these big ultra marathons, I'm never going to deter you from that, but take your time in building up to them and getting experience doing things. If you are intrigued, but you don't have a ton of experience with running and training, so much of ultra marathons isn't just even the training for it, but the execution of your nutrition and strategy and pacing and doing the ultras themselves. I do think that there is benefit of having experience in those races to figure out your nutrition or multiple training cycles or just training a little bit longer on those long runs to figure that out. But I mean, people sign up for 100-milers for their first ultra marathon. Some people take years like me to build up to it. There's no right or wrong timeline to this, but I would say run your first half marathon if that's your goal. I would encourage you to do a marathon or a 50K maybe next, see how that feels. Do you like the long distance running? Do you like the training? Do you like the commitment to it? Is that something that you're actually interested in doing the training for, not just interested in the idea of? It's something that I would ask yourself, and that might evolve over time. But to get started with this, again, finish your half. Go listen to my podcast on you running your first ultra marathon, your first 50K, and seeing what I recommend for training minimums and strategy and approach to that. Seeing if that works for you. Getting your feet wet in this longer high distance stuff. And then from there, after you do that, you can probably, once you build up into a 50K, you can build into a 50 to 100K to 100-miler over the next maybe 1 to 2 years, just depending on your own personal fitness timeline experience and or like what you personally want to do within this. Again, it's just always going to depend on the person and what they need to kind of get them to that goal. Determining peak mileage. I kind of already talked about that. I gave some minimums and references for that. Again, my peak mileage, I wanted to aim for a range of that. It's very typical and typical coaching recommendations for 100-milers. is kind of that 50 to 70 mile per week range. Again, unless you're like super fit, super fast, more elite. Most people aren't really probably doing more of that. If you're a lay runner, or even some really good runners aren't doing super high mileage. Mileage and volume drive things forward, but I think that I'd be more focused on that accumulative time under the curve and gaining fitness across time at an appropriate level of mileage for what you're trying to do. And so that's how I would determine it. I'm also a coach, and so I coach myself through this, and that's also how I determine that. So for you guys, following a training plan or getting a coach, or joining us at the List Method, whatever that looks like for you, is be my recommendation, so you can let someone figure that out for you and what that looks like for you, and either help you out with that or kind of work with you along the way. I would love to hear what ended up being the most or least important aspects of training this time. I don't know, guys. I don't want to say that I had a perfect year of training. I don't think I had a perfect year of training. But what ended up being the most important was volume, running a lot, focusing in all of my focus on the volume. And what ended up being the least important was fighting tooth and nail to maintain heavier compounds in lifting. If you followed my full week of training videos, you saw that basically once I took that 3 weeks off in June and then knew I came back into a phase of building back up my running mileage, I kind of just had to make the concession of not loading my lifts as heavy as they were in June before that lift. I think I pulled like 300 pounds on a deadlift for some sets before I went to that trip. I was doing squats with like 225, 235 on back squat before that trip. But for me, that making that concession, was something that I just did so it didn't overstress my body, especially because it's so sensitive. And so I would say like feeling the need to maintain the heaviest lifting I ever did or have ever done was the least important aspect. And I've been doing this for so many training cycles and so many years. And I know that so much of that is maintained through what I have done. And the neuromuscular adaptations of bringing that back will come back pretty easily once I start adding that back in. So I would say that was the least important, but I did heavy compounds. And I will say the most important thing, aside from just maintaining running volume and consistency, was the accessory-based training and strength work that I did. I cannot tell you how much that held me together this year. Like that was like the bread and butter of what kept me going this entire year. So that, with consistent volume, I would say ended up being training-wise the most important things that I did this year. So volume and strength. I know people don't like that answer because it's not sexy, but I really do think that's what made this year of training really, really successful for me. This one says, do you think it's necessary to do 100K before a 100 miler or do anything beyond a 50 miler? So I consider doing 100K this year, but I do agree this person was saying like it's so fatiguing. It is a pretty fatiguing thing to do. I mean, there's people who do multiple hundreds in a calendar year. So it's all about what you're trained and adapted for or willing to do. Sometimes I don't know if it's the smartest thing to do, but it's probably not necessary. The longest run I did was 53 miles, 11 hours in that race. And I didn't even plan to do that race. My longest run before this, other than that, was going to be the 30 mile and 20 mile back-to-back weekends. Those 30 mile races were going to be my longest runs. I do like the idea of doing a 50 miler within the same calendar year or like, training cycle of leading up to 100. I'm really glad that I got that 50 in. I actually think that was like one of the best decisions that I made, both for myself physically, but also mentally, and just figuring out things for my race wise. I think you can figure out so much of what you need to figure out for a 100 miler in a 50 miler or some 50Ks like I did this year, nutrition wise, strategy, pacing, how you feel, gear, without that extra expended over the top, maybe necessarily negative digging you in the ditch of 100K unless you have a really long time to recover. So I did a 50 miler like 7 weeks out from that race. I don't think I would have done it any closer. If I did 100K, I was probably going to do it about 10-ish weeks out. So I would have spaced it out a lot more, but it probably would have dug into my recovery a lot more than that. So I potentially maybe would just be cautious with that. It might just not be necessary. 100K isn't that many more miles than a 50 miler, but it is enough more miles that you are running for significantly more amount of time. And if it's a tougher race, you might be out there for a very long time. You might be better off doing like some of these time trial races. I know my friend Alex did like a 24-hour time trial race like months before her race to work out gear, nutrition, and nighttime pacing. That might be something that you might consider as well. Any trends to what made a day a bad day, recover off, types of session, etc.? I think the things that made things a bad day for me were work interfering with my training or training interfering with my work. I think that I will always struggle with that. I know that's not a direct answer about training, but I will say like work stress really impacts my training, my desire to train, my motivation to train, quality of training that I have those days. That's just always been true for me. And so I will say that, or recovery. Just I was really peaked. I was really fatigued. I was really sore. I was really tired, and just getting through the sessions and trying to recover where and when I can, I would say, is probably the thing. I don't think there's ever been a specific type of session that's felt worse for bad days for me, or just being bored out of my freaking mind, running alone, the same trails or paths all of the time was probably that. The boredom factor of training this year for me was probably the worst part of it. And I think I'm better for it, but that was probably what made most days bad days. Like, oh my God, I don't want to go out here and run the same loop, the same path, the same trail, the same exact route alone again, and just getting over that. But that was probably what made most of my worst days my worst days. Any favorite training days, moments, and why? I think any time you have a training run where you have that breakthrough moment where you really feel like, oh my gosh, like my fitness is improving, something is clicking, those always feel really good to me. And then the few training days or moments where, things felt effortless, or I realized what I was doing, or I was just having fun doing it, those always feel special. Like just having the fitness to do the things that I want to do this year really felt special to me more than anything. And just being able to spend a lot of time outdoors in beautiful places really made this year totally worth it. Any old reliable things that you realize that during training that you need to change. So you definitely go back and watch my last few week of training, race training videos. A lot of things. I cannot mix like electrolytes in my water anymore. I'm switching to clear water for a lot of my hydration, and or mixing like scratch or electrolytes, or like one bottle at a time that has salt or carbs in it and another clear bottle of water. That's just something that I realize I can't do. I cannot drink caffeine. I can't do erythritol. These are things that I've noticed that have really upset my stomach or bothered my stomach a lot this year, that I've really worked through a lot with training. And so those are like little things that I definitely have changed in the approach of I've toyed with changing mostly, is how I'm getting in carbs or drinks without it I deal with a lot of reflux with that, or like the burning throat or with that in races. So really trying to adjust for those things was huge for me this year, because I know that my stomach can turn on me in 100-miler so easily. And so really trying to figure out what that looks like and works for me. Those are little types of nutrition changes that I made that were like reliable, that I used to just be able to shoot back liquid IVs or elements or whatever it is in my water, and just having to mix it up and break that up is probably one of the most consistently like things that I've done for years. That was fine. That is now something that just I had to change this year with training. And then any new things you tried out with training, food, equipment, if anything. So most of my gear is the same that it's always been, but I really just mixed that's switching that out. And then Super Scratch from Scratch Labs has been an absolute godsend. I have been doing a lot more of that than Tailwind, because I do also find for me that irritates. Tailwind doesn't upset my gut, but I just feel like drinking the sugar or the salty sugar or the salty sweetened candy, like it just, I don't know, it's probably because I did acid reflux and ultras. Really burns, like I feel like the back of your throat by the end of the day, because you're just so much salt and sugar. So just that Super Scratch, I feel like feels like you're almost drinking like paper water is the best way to describe it. It's like cornstarch in it, super starch in it. And so that's been really great for me. Mixing that in and doing that has been a new thing for me this year that I've really, really enjoyed. And then, did you plan on training in advance when traveling this year, or did you book the travel closer to each trip? I had my life happen. I had part of this year's training plan. Part of it wasn't planned with traveling, and I just adjusted my training around it. I knew most of what was coming this year, not all of it. Knowing me, I overcommitted to more things than I should have, but I just had to adjust and work with it and go about it. Some of the stuff was definitely last minute, like my California trip being longer than planned because Rue just wanted to go out there was longer than planned. Colorado the week before, the last week of my peak was not part of the plan. Shenandoah for those 2 big weeks weren't part of this plan. Those were kind of last minute things, but a lot of my standing work trips were parts of the whole plan, the whole part of the time. And I just knew that I was going to have to train around them or through them or just figure it out. And that's just exactly what I did. Are you bringing multiple pairs of shoes and clothing and change during the race? Yes, I have 2 pairs of shoes. I'll have multiple clothing. I will do a gear recap video for you guys on all of that. Do you have a caffeine strategy the day of, going based off how you feel? Right now, I've been pulling back to like only 1 cup of coffee or 1 like chai concentrate cup of coffee. So under 100 milligrams of caffeine a day right now. I'm trying to pull back into my race. I'm going to try to not really use any caffeine during the day until the nighttime portion of my race. I might end up doing some caffeine during the day, but I don't want to do a ton. I really really, really want the caffeine to get me through that night portion of the race. So I'm trying to desensitize myself. And then I have caffeine pills. That is a new nutrition thing that I did this year. The powdered caffeine stuff. Oh my gosh, no, can't do it. Stomach hates that now. So I do have caffeine pills and or caffeinated Tailwind and Coke, or I do have Monsters. Not the healthiest energy drink, but it uses sucralose and not erythritol, so I will do it for that, but probably for the night portions, I'm going to try to really ramp that up, or like 24 hours plus. So I'm just going to send it on caffeine. I'm going to try to not overdo it because I will be more sensitive to it, but that's my point is that I want it to be more sensitive so I can get it through night or that later in that next day after 24 hours to kind of get me through when I'm really going to need it the most. I saw you start using Element for electrolytes instead of Liquid IV. So I do want to clarify, I do still use Liquid IV. I use Liquid IV like during the day when I'm lifting my weekday runs. I started using Element because of the smaller packets and higher sodium concentration. One, I needed more sodium in the summer. Heat and humidity was kicking my butt. Two, I was pixie sticking them all year. If you go back and watch my videos, I was like shooting them back and chasing them with water. So I switched to Naked Element at the very end this year, and I'll be mixing that in with my bottles of Scratch during the race. And I addressed that a little bit in my last week of training video as well. So that's just like a nutritional adjustment that I made for me to make it a little bit easier on my gut. And then how to use the raw element, mix it with Scratch or keep it separate. I'm probably going to mix it with Gatorade or Scratch and just add it to that carb that I'm already drinking, since it's just basically strict salt, and mix it in with those bottles of water. And haven't pixie sticked them, but I would assume that they're a little less like tart or gut droppy because they don't have the sweetener that the flavored ones do as well. But I'm just probably going to mix them into those bottles the day of. What do you think about while running for so long? Just zone out, go to music, make up stories, cry. You think of everything, nothing. You listen to so much music. You ruminate on things in your head. You are so freaking bored. You kind of just go through waves of this. I also, during races, I get a lot more zoned in and focused on race day. And sometimes I feel like my brain is just so focused on what you're doing. And honestly, running and racing sometimes is like the only time I don't hear my brain think or am not thinking about something for like the first time all day. And so sometimes it's nice because it's just like the first time my brain turns off, or I'm just focused on the work at hand, or you're just in the pain cave and everything sucks and you hate your life and you're just so focused on just like moving forward. It really does oscillate, but I do listen to a lot of music, and I've listened to a lot more music than anything else this year. Some podcasts here and there, but I really just, by the time I was getting to training at this point with work and everything this year, I just wanted to turn my brain off. So we were just rocking and rolling music a lot this year. Are there aid stations to pick up bags at, or do you carry all your fuel and gear from the start? Yes, there's aid stations, and I'll have crew and I'll have people follow me along, and my documentary will show all of that for you guys and how they're doing this. Are you worried after the 100 it will be head first into 200s and beyond? I don't know. I mean, I think someday I could see myself doing a 200 miler. Something about it really scratches an itch for me that I think I'd like to try. They're just so different though. I'd like to get through 100 first, actually see that I can finish this. I feel like everyone really believes in me that I'm going to finish this, but you never know what's going to happen. I think the training would be kind of like, just as intense at this point in time when it comes to these things. I just want to see how this goes before I commit to anything more than this, but never say never with me. I am a curious little girl. My foot and shoe journey tips. I also have foot issues and struggle with longer runs. So if you guys don't follow me on Instagram, my feet grew like 8 weeks out from my race. And so that was just a whole thing. That was not a good thing. That was not planned. So I ended up buying just a half a size bigger in all of my shoes at the last minute. But for me, if I were you guys, just go to a shoe store, try things on, trial and error, order and return. You will know if a shoe works for you. It shouldn't hurt you when you're running. It should feel good. For me, it's just been trial and error over the years, and then just buying a million pairs of shoes in what works and fits for me. How do you prevent chafing with long runs? Squirrel's not butter, baby. Amazon page linked here. Just buy it. Amazing. You just need anti-chafing stick. My favorite part of training for 100 miler and least favorite part, but I mean, they feel like they're the same. I will say, the cooking and feeding yourself thing of race training has got to be the most exhausting thing in the freaking world. Hungry Root has saved my life. Shameless plug, code DocList40 will save you 40% off your first box. Having one of those each, like a box after my travels and trips the last few months and weeks, has been truly life-saving for me, because the cooking and the feeding and the eating, oh my God, it's exhausting. I know that sounds really dramatic because I know people are always struggling with weight loss or all those things, but God, that itself has got to be the worst part of it. And then my favorite part was just probably I spent so much time in the woods this year. I spent so much time in beautiful places running this year, and having the fitness do that, I have so much gratitude for. Do you prefer training solo or with others? Man, I wish I had friends to run with. I really do. I'm so sick of running with myself. I'm so excited to get to the race and have pacers and have Jason and not be running alone. How did your macros change throughout the training process? So as my protein pretty much stays the same all year, but my fats don't go up a ton. They go up relative to my calorie intake, but my carbs went up significantly, and that really drove up my calories. So that would be kind of my recommendation for most people. Again, my fast and fed mini guide or my free macro calculator will help you guys kind of adjust for that. But really, that just your carbs. You're just eating so many carbs. That's pretty much what it comes down to. You're just eating so many carbs all the time and eating all the time. How do you even comprehend 100 miles in one go? I don't know. I'll let you guys know. I still cannot comprehend it. Honestly, I will comprehend it when I'm there, and then I'll realize probably so many miles, 60 miles in, freaking heck, I'm shit. And then I'll probably have a moment where I'm just like, F, I am doing this. So I have no idea how to comprehend this. Truly, I don't. I will let you guys know. Signs you're ready for 100 miles after a 50, assuming you liked it. I don't think anyone's ever ready to run 100 miles. I think if you've ran a 50 and you like it and you're willing to commit to the training and you feel like you can make the cutoffs and have your nutrition and your gear or the time to figure that out, you can probably train for 100, and just making sure that you are ready to do the training more than anything would be my biggest thing versus being ready necessarily to do 100. I don't think anyone's ever ready to do a 100-mile race. I think there's people that are very underprepared going into these things. But I think if you're doing ultras and you have the experience and you have the drive and you want to do the training, then, there's people at these races across ages and fitness levels and or physical abilities that finish these things. And it's a really amazing human thing to experience and be a part of. And so I would say if you do a 50 and you like it and you're ready to do the training and you're willing to commit to that, like you could do a 100-miler in the next year or two as part of a longer term training goal. In what ways did suddenly and unexpectedly acquiring Kona change your training? My runs took a lot longer when I had to run that little hoe. She's sleeping on the floor right now. That month of April was way wonky, just more demands on everything else that I had to do in my day-to-day life. But otherwise, Kona is the best thing that's ever happened to me, so nothing bad at all. Did you figure out your training plan by yourself, or did someone help you with it? Someone also asked if Noah did it. So Noah, coach the list method, is my one-on-one coach for lifting. He did all my lifting this year. I did all of my running training. I basically coach myself. It's a way for me to, coach myself through the crazy travel schedule that I have to deal. And also, then I can experiment with different things across the year that then make its way into list method training programs. So I use me as a guinea pig with me or me and Noah for a lot of stuff that we integrate into the list method through my lifting or running training, where I'm trying things out myself before we kind of give them to clients. So that's I did it myself. It was me. It's hard. What ratio is running intrinsic or intrinsic motivation for you, or balanced? You have to want this stuff for yourself. There's definitely days that I'm pulling extrinsically from, external factors around me. But a lot of the time, if you're training this much or doing this stuff, it has to be something off inside your brain for yourself in order to do that. What is my support system during my race? I have Regis, my husband, Kona, the crew chief master, my mother-in-law, my friend Alex, and then Luke, my videographer, coming to my race. And so they will be crewing, supporting, or documenting that. What kind of negative self-talk did you face that you had to combat? I didn't really face a lot of negative self-talk other than catastrophizing injuries and pain, thinking that oh my God, it's over. But I've done a lot better with that. And two, just boredom. Oh my God, this is hard. I'm bored. This sucks. And just basically telling myself to get over it. Has been the whole year. So get over it. Who cares? It's going to hard. It's going to be suck. It's going to suck on race day. Get over it. How did I figure out my nutrition? I did that myself as well, but I do have those resources here for you. And I would definitely say watch those videos because I think that would be helpful for you. And then how did I choose which 100-miler to do as my first? Time of year, logistics for me and Jason both doing it together. Races that are known for being well executed and well put on. I wanted to do a fall race. I wanted to enjoy tapering and training through fall and enjoying that, even though I feel like fall didn't come here until just now. And so that was kind of part of the logistical plan. And then timing it around my travel and busy things that I had. I couldn't do a September race because of my September trip. So October made more sense. So it just kind of worked out. Best mantras that have really helped on tough training days. This sounds so cynical. I told myself pretty much all the time that it's good. It's hard, good. Because it's going to be hard on race day. You're bored, okay, you're going to be bored on race day. It sucks, good. That's going to suck on race day. And that's kind of, a lot of the approach that I took this year, even though that seems a little bit cynical. That's kind of like, I just, okay, cool, get over yourself. Like, this is just part of it. And just saying, I'm going to show up, and that is what it is, was really kind of my mental approach this year. It wasn't really super positive. And then, or just believing in myself and my goals and knowing that I'm the type of person who keeps promises and shows up for myself. And that accountability is really what kept me going for a lot of this. And I think that kind of covers everything. A lot of these were kind of repeated or similar to ones I already answered, but I wanted to make sure I touched on as much of or as everything that you guys have. So thank you if you submitted questions either on Instagram or YouTube here. If you have any questions that you want in a follow-up or questions about the day or race, you can leave them in the comments below, and I can potentially do another video talking about these things or the race specifically. I'll have another video coming out with prepping for the race, packing, gear, all that stuff, and we'll have a full documentary of race day as well. And so thank you guys. If you have tuned in, paid attention, liked, commented, shared, subscribed, all of the things when it comes to this 100-miler buildup, documenting this has been one of the hardest parts of this year for me. And so if you are over on YouTube or the gram or the podcast and you haven't hit that subscribe button on the platforms yet, like, share, comment, engage, I encourage you to do so now, but if you haven't, that's okay. I appreciate you tuning in, listening nonetheless. But if you have, a big, huge piece of gratitude for you guys for your support this year. I feel like I have so many people rooting for me on the day of. I will probably definitely cry during the race. I'm sure Alex, who will be running my Instagram for me during it, will share all the encouragement that people are sending me. I know so many of you guys are rooting for me to finish. I want to finish for you guys, and I hope that's the outcome of the day. But no matter what happens, I'm really proud of myself for the training that I did this year, and I'm really grateful for the community I have here supporting me through that. So thank you guys for being here. And again, thank you for tuning in to the Messy Middle podcast or my YouTube channel here today. And as always, I will catch you guys on the next one.